Have you ever experienced something so crippling in your life that has made you feel broken? I have. Are you someone who has a giving heart but is struggling to feel good themselves? Are you consistently putting your needs aside to take care of everyone else? If so, you're not alone. Giving starts with giving to yourself so that you are able to give of yourself to other people. Isn't it time you took back control and discovered what makes you tick? Join me in my journey and find out how you can feel better about yourself, live your best life, and share that with others. Thinking of yourself, it doesn't make you selfish. It makes you brave. I'm Nelia, and this is the Giving Starts With You podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Giving Starts With You podcast. I'm your host, Nelia Hutt. It is a pleasure today to have and reintroduce to you a past guest, Keez. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm feeling really, really good. Thanks, Nellie. And it's lovely to be back here. I know when we last recorded together in episode 91, we made the decision to do this particular one today. So it's been a long time in the making, and now we're here, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you agreed to come back on the show. So everyone, yes, it's episode 91, Recover with Reality Therapy. Now, Keez is a reality therapy certified counselor, a speaker, and a teacher. And in her past episode, if you have not checked it out, please go back and listen to that so you can get some of the backstory as well. Such an important interview. I've had a lot of people comment about how helpful and impactful it was. So in episode 91, she shared her struggle with chronic fatigue, migraines, OCD, anxiety, suicidal depression, and depersonalization, and how reality therapy helped her recover. Today, we're going to speak about something that I admittedly don't know a lot about, and I'm here to be educated by Keez. But I think is a very important topic, and I don't think it's discussed enough. And some of the listeners may be struggling as well. And if you're not struggling, perhaps you know someone who is struggling. So today we are going to be speaking about eating disorders. So Keez is a survivor of a 9-year struggle with anorexia nervosa, and she now dedicates her life to empowering those impacted by this disease. So I wanted to give you a very warm welcome today. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about this very important topic today with us.
Absolutely enjoying the opportunity to do so, because I think there's so much misinformation that's been given about eating disorders, and particularly why they occur in the first place. And that was certainly my experience traveling through. When I experienced anorexia at the age of 15 through to 24, it was a long time ago, and there wasn't a lot of information about eating disorders, and I didn't know what it was. I just knew when I got that piece of paper with different pictures on it and I looked at it and read the text, I thought, yes, that applies to me. But moving forward from there, it was a very long and hard road as to get answers as to why that was my life and how the heck I get out of this situation I found myself in, hence the development of all those other associated illnesses that you've just outlined. So, and it wasn't until I was in my 30s that my answers arrived by connecting with the right person. So, unfortunately, it can be a long, arduous road unless you're very fortunate to connect with the right person the first time. So we might explore some of that today.
So you said you were 15.
Yes, I was 15. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how all of that started for you?
Well, and I think this is where one of the myths comes in, because I think at the time everyone just thought, oh, JL, you're trying to look good. You're trying to be better than everybody else. You're trying to, be perfect and be the perfect looking person. And it wasn't about that at all. But that's certainly how it was interpreted. But just very briefly, because I think in the other episode 91, there's a lot of my background there. If people want to go back, we won't, revisit that on this particular YouTube. But I was born into a family that were farmers initially. And when I was 6, my father decided to go into what was the Methodist ministry here in Australia, and now it's known as the Uniting Church. And that meant moving to Adelaide, our capital city, where I now reside as well. And I'm looking all over the place here. I'm very conscious of thinking about everything.
That's okay. Just be yourself. You're doing great.
Yeah, and so for 4 years, I went to 2 different schools, because one we went to and then we shifted and went to a closer one. And so that was another interruption in my life. And then, of course, 4 years after that, we went down to a place called Port Macdonald, a beautiful little fishing village here in South Australia. And I lived for 3 years down there and went to school. And this is when the isolation and the bullying and the separation from what I now know as normal life really began to show itself to me. And I was very different. I was also the minister's daughter, so that didn't help my reputation. It's a bit like being the policeman's daughter or son, in a country town. There's a bit of a difference in how you're perceived and how you're seen. And that was certainly happening for me. But I was also beginning to, hear other conversations of the other younger people around me, and hearing about how people lived and what they could and couldn't do. And my world was very restricted and very, very controlled, not only from a religious point of view, but what I call family culture point of view as well. But those differences were beginning to confuse me. And then for 3 years, we shifted up to a wheat belt place in the top north of South Australia called Kimber. And this is when I was 13, 14 and 15. And I was the top athlete. I was a straight A student. I was, the perfect person. I was tall and, slimish and blonde and all of those things. And I had no friends. I spent a lot of time at lunch and recess time in the toilets just hiding, because I had no one to communicate with. And sports day was great because I used to go out and train. And it was during that time that I think with getting older, you start to sit back and you begin to assess. And the eyes that I had, the way I was looking at the world, the way I had been taught, the values, the beliefs and everything came into play. And somewhere, and it wasn't a conscious thing, it was just somewhere in me, it was, well, they've got friends because, and I was focusing on how they behaved, how they spoke, what they did, what they looked like. I began to sort of dissect people visually and think, well, if I can just achieve that. So if I wear my skirts shorter, if I wear my hair differently, if I do this, if I do that, then perhaps acceptance will come through, my dear. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. It was all about something being wrong with me. And then somewhere along the line in that last year at Kimber, I must have decided that weight was something else. And so I decided to change my diet. I was learning about nutrition through home economics, and I began to employ those ideas into my private life, but to the extreme. And so then I lost a lot of weight. And somehow that became the obsession side of it. But looking back now, it was never about, gaining acceptance through what I look like. It was, what can I control so that I can be accepted? Because I'm in this controlled family life. How can I get some control back and some semblance of self back? And that was just the way that I went. Now, some people might decide, some people get that stressed about it. They might end up in a mental illness that's characterized by gambling or characterized by alcoholism or another way of dealing with it. For me, I went into this thing called an eating disorder, and but acceptance didn't happen. I was still bullied. I was still isolated. I didn't achieve the things. But for the next 9 years, I did that to myself, hoping that what I wanted to achieve would happen. And you get to a point where I'm not letting go of this, because I know tomorrow if I just keep going, it will happen for me. But well, I guess it did in sort of a way, because I went to teachers college then, I did end up with a boyfriend and I did end up getting married. But behind the scenes of that facade was a very lonely, very unhappy, developing young woman who had this secret of suffering. And Yeah. So,
It's, thank you for saying that it has nothing to do with your looks, because I think there's a myth out there that portrays eating disorders as a very vain disease. And that is so untrue. And like any disease, it comes from us wanting to control our own selves, whether it's alcohol or, any of the things that you mentioned, gambling or even sex addiction, anything. And it's so important that people realize that, because, being a teenager, like my son right now, he's 15, and, it reminds me of what it was like at that age. And you don't know enough to break things down and analyze things. You just know you feel like crap. You know that you're being ignored, that you don't belong anywhere, that you're lonely. And you it's so hard, because I remember as well thinking, I don't belong here. Like, I might have friends, but they're not really my friends. And they talk behind your back. Then I'm trying to hide who I am. And then there's so many things. And it makes us feel like everybody's watching us. But in reality, looking back, nobody was really cared about what we were doing. Like, we make this so much bigger.
mm,
And no matter what it is, it's somebody that's crying out for help. So I really appreciate you explaining that, because I want people to know that it is another disease. It's not something that's related with, you want to look better. You want to, as a 15-year-old girl, of course, that's what you thought it was about. Why wouldn't you? You're 15. You're trying everything that you can. Like, this is not your fault, just like, with so many other things. So thank you so much for explaining that, and for saying that it wasn't until, you were in your 30s that you started to understand.
yeah, that's right. I just want to go back to that. It's not about your looks. It's not. The issues and what's inside is what's driving the behaviors that you end up in. So it's very easy for people to say, well, you're just obsessed about your looks, because that's the behavior that we do. We stand in front of the mirror. We exercise excessively. I used to spend hours in front of the mirror, tweaking this and tweaking that, and then looking at magazines. And the magazine pictures were the ideals. I thought, well, and that for me was something to aspire to. If I could just be like that,
Mm.
I'll be accepted as well. But it's a mixture. That's not the only element. That's one of the behaviors that we do. And
Mm.
therefore, it's very easy for an outsider to say, well, you're just obsessed about your looks, because that's what they see you doing. But
Mm.
what you're really doing is matching yourself or criticizing yourself as against something that you think is being accepted, and then trying to emulate that and trying to do that. So that's where the confusion comes in. So in a lot of therapy, well, why do you want to look good? Why do you want to do this? Why are you doing diet culture? Why are you doing all of these things? Well, you end up going down those pathways because that's how you think you can achieve this. But they're a manifestation of an expansion of an illness that began small, and the longer you're in it, grows bigger and bigger and bigger. As you try to gain that control, you add another layer to what you're actually doing. So it is very easy for an outsider to assess it in that way. And I think that was done for me for many, many years. And that's why I didn't, and that's how it was viewed back then. And that's why I didn't find the right help until I was 37.
Mm.
Yeah. I found, pardon me, over time was I became a chameleon almost. And so I would find myself going into a social setting and very quickly judge the behaviors and what they were doing and how they were speaking and what they were talking about and how they were behaving with each other, at a social engagement or something. And I would become that person that I felt they wanted to see in that setting. So I would change myself accordingly. And then I might go into a different setting. I might go out. I was a netball player when I could still do it, and before I got too weak. And I would go in and I would be a different person again, because that's a different type of social setting. And we speak a little bit differently to each other as we're trying to work out and navigate this game together and everything. So I become that person. I would then go and visit my family, particularly my mother and father. And very quickly, boom, I would turn into that very quiet, very withdrawn, don't say much, play the game, be perfect, do what you have to do. And again, so, in any one day, I might be 3 different people in 3 different social settings.
Just to blend in, right? Not to stand out.
Yeah, well, not to stand, but more so, if I behave like this, I'll be accepted in this group. If I behave like this, and with my parents, I know I have to behave like this because otherwise, I'm going to be yelled at or whatever's going to happen to me. So for me, that's how I played it out. And so, of course, along the way, you completely lose who you are. You just go, well, but you don't know you're doing that. But you do when you go into recovery, you go, well, heck, who am I? I've been all these different people to please all these different people. It hasn't worked, but along the way, I've just chopped pieces off of myself until I just don't exist anymore. And I've just got no real personality or anything. So what's going on here?
I'm so sorry that you went through all of that. But I was thinking, when you were saying those things, I was thinking, like, when do you get to be yourself? How do you even know who that is? And then you just said it right there.
Yeah, well, you don't. And the longer you're in an eating disorder or any mental illness, the more you lose yourself and you have no idea. And then, so a huge part of your recovery is coming back to who you are. And with eating disorders, and for me in that arena, it was giving myself permission to be who I was as well. And that was a hard one to say, am I allowed to? And that came back to one of the reasons why I developed an eating disorder in the first place. And that was really, really hard. Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to drink alcohol, or am I going to be, hit with a big stick or something? I had a lot of fear ideology embedded into my learning about how life works. And that was what I had to debunk. That's what I had to work with and work against and get rid of, all the fears that were just building up in me from the time I was born. And at 15, that's how it manifested for me. And as a result of isolation and bullying, and I can look back and see how the person I was becoming actually drove people away from me as well.
Right.
So, it ended up being a two-way thing, but you don't know that's what you're doing. And, but it was 15 years of being in a very controlled setting in my private life, and then trying to fit into the real world, and then not knowing how to do it, and then experiencing all the, and bang, something had to happen to fall me apart, I suppose. So you begin to say, hey, hang on, this is not worth being here. That, it's got to be better than this. I just can't keep doing this. And as I referred to before, when that happened for me at 15, there was no understanding, no knowledge, no knowing, nothing. So that's why it took so long for me to gain understanding of my why, if you like, of why that happened at 15. I will just say, bring in now that I was anorexic then for the 9 years. At the age of 24, I was then married and I shifted into Victoria. I'm in South Australia. So I went over to Victoria and I lived on 10 acres over there. And I was a teacher, and one of my colleagues was pregnant, and she said, look, I'm going to go for an appointment with my doctor. Would you please come with me? And I thought, why? Well, you're a big girl. You don't need me to hold your hand. But there was ulterior motive. And so I went along with Inga, and she had set up an appointment for me, and she actually came in with me.
Wow.
And sat there, and they said, and she expressed through the doctor, I obviously had talked about it beforehand, she had observed my eating and observed my behaviours and had seen the difference. And that caring side of her came out enough to put it on the table.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah. And then I went to a psychiatrist that this doctor had referred to me. And that's where I first heard the word anorexia nervosa. So that wasn't until I was 24. And so, as was the way of recovery back then, I was weighed every week when I went in, and the idea was if I put the weight back on, everything else would disappear, everything else will go, and I'll be normal again, and I'll be healthy and happy, and we can just get on with my life. It was very difficult to break that and begin to eat again, and it was a long, hard slog of allowing myself to eat more And there was a lot of things that I did to give myself the courage, to take those steps. And it was still in a very controlled manner. But eventually I did get back to 58 kilos was the highest I ever got. And that's just under 9 stone, I think. So I did get rid of the eating disorder side of it. But in its place came the OCD, the depersonalization, all of those other mental illness manifestations, because what didn't happen for me was we didn't explore my story and look at the reasons why an eating disorder was my life from the age of 15 to 24. And that was the huge gap.
Yes, that's why it's so important for people to know they can't get better on their own. It's with most addictions, you just can't. I know we like to believe that we can, but we need the experts. We need the coaches. We need the therapists, the counselors. We need friends too, a listening ear. We need all of those people behind us. I love when you said that your coworker, she was the one who, sometimes it takes somebody, like I'm getting goosebumps because I hear this so much, that it takes this one person, and sometimes it's the least expected person, and they come in and they notice that, because it's so important for the listeners to realize that even though you may not be going through this, be the person that's observant. If you see someone struggling with alcohol or eating disorders or gambling, don't be judgmental. Just observe people around you, and maybe you're the only person that could stand up for them. Be that person like JL had for her, for that moment. We can't do it by ourselves. There's no way.
No, there isn't, because what we don't understand is that it's not about the behavior that we're doing. It's about the thinking that brought us there in the first place, and how we relate to the world and how we see the world and filter it. And it's embedded in our story. And if we don't go back and have a look at our story and have a look at the main events and the main ideas and concepts that we've been taught, mine was all laced with fear. And so how can you live a normal life when you're looking over your shoulder all the time? And so that needed to be examined very closely and explored. And then for me to be able to make the connection between that and the developing eating disorder, and then all the other things later on in my 20s and early 30s. So you can't do it on your own, because you don't know that's what you actually have to do. And so you need somebody, and the best person to help you is someone who's already had the lived experience. So that was also the person brought in at the age of 37, had her own lived experience. And because they truly understand. And judging, it's very easy to judge. Oh, for goodness sake, just get over it. Just stick that cake in your mouth and eat it, And that can be very damaging. It takes a very special person to realize and understand that there's something going on that's not very pleasant for this person, and this is how it's being played out in their life. This is how they're doing it at the moment. But it's not about alcohol. It's not about eating disorder. It's about something in their lives that needs to be resolved for them. And then they don't need the eating disorder anymore. They don't need the alcohol or all of those other manifestations. They can begin to leave those behind as they replace it with something a lot better. In their life. And that takes a lot of hard work and a lot of guidance from the right person to look for the cues, to look for the gaps in the story, or the extra information in a story that exists that, the normal person wouldn't hear. The normal person would hear the storyline. Somebody who's lived it would hear the storyline and the bits in between that you've got to pull out and say, but hang on, what about this bit?
It's all the quiet moments.
Let's explore that.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what was clear to me.
And maybe what people aren't saying.
That's right. Yeah, always looking for the deeper meaning,
And that's why I'm so amazed by your story, because I love that you've used your pain and now you are helping other people in the same situation, and I love this so much, because it just shows that anybody can overcome. when you have the right guidance. And I think it's so amazing and so beautiful that you are that person for somebody else. I really think, we're all born into this world with something that we're meant to do, and sometimes through pain comes beauty, right? And I cannot imagine what those years were like for you. And I'm sorry that no one noticed before your friend did. Um, but now you can help so many people, and you are helping so many people, and you seem so passionate about getting through and so easy to talk to. And I think it's great. I think you're in the right line of business, because I think you're going to be phenomenal.
Right
um,
line of work.
yes. If you don't mind, can we just go back to, what would be like a typical day, like for someone who is suffering from an eating disorder? What does that typical day look like for them?
Well, I think it's hard to actually say an overall typical day, because everyone has their own experience. And because, I was labelled anorexia nervosa, then you have bulimics. And then
Right.
over there's all these other labels that have been added that have a slightly different behaviour that's going on for that person. So you get that label, and you're doing this is just slightly different to the next one. So there's all these
Okay.
labels, which I think, and this is just my personal opinion, from the experience that I've had and what I bring to the table. So my comments come from that.
Mhm.
And I wish there weren't all these labels. I wish there was just one label, eating disorder. So, everyone does it differently. I'll speak about my experience with it. Gradually, I got to a point where all I would have for breakfast, we have a product here in Australia called Vita Wheats, and they're like little crisp breads.
Mm.
And I used to melt cheese on that under the grill. And that was breakfast, just 2 of those in the morning. And then at lunchtime, I would have 2 more of those with a slice of cheese on the top, and then an apple or a banana or an orange or something like that. That's all I would have. And at the end of the day, I would have a very controlled amount of meat and vegetables, and then a dessert of some sort. And that was every day. It was basically the same foods every day.
Mm.
And I was speaking with a client recently, and she reminded me of this. So I thought, yes, I remember doing that. It was also time-wise. You had to have it at a particular time,
Mm.
because, and as I explored this with her, I went, yes, that's the reason why we did that, or why I did that, and why you're doing that. You don't want to eat sooner,
Mm.
because that means, you're going to feel that hunger, and you're going to have to wait until 6 o'clock, to have your food. For example, when I started, I was older and I was starting to go out, we might go out to dinner as a group. I knew I had to wait that day. Instead of having dinner at 6 o'clock, I have to wait until 7 o'clock. And it was just like, oh, it
Everything
was
was
so
really thought out. Yeah.
over
And
the
control.
first days, because I knew that from 6 o'clock until I got that food in my mouth, I was going to experience really bad hunger and go through that awful stage. So for me, it was just having the same foods, the same quantities every day. If meals were later, having that agonizing wait until that meal came along. And then invariably, once a week or once a fortnight, because my body was so hungry,
Mhm.
if I went out to a buffet meal, buffets were, smorgasbords were just a nightmare for me, because I would allow myself to have that extra bit of food. And as soon as you did that and you signaled to your body, and somewhere your body goes, hey, there's more food available, I don't have to be hungry anymore. Oh, let's have some more. That hunger would take over. And then that uncontrolled behavior of just stuffing as much as I could in my mouth. And I would eat huge
Your body
amounts of food
needs it.
in
Right.
a short amount of time. And my body was loving it, because it's saying, yay, at last I'm getting some food into me that I can, help you function by. But then the next day I would wake up and just feel bloated and awful and horrible. And I would have 24 hours of this awful bloated feeling, and vow and declare I would never, ever do this again and put myself through this awful feeling. And then, 48 hours later, I was sort of back to what was my normal at the time. So, and then that was the cycle, always starving myself, starving myself. And as soon as I ate that extra thing, or I'm, going out to dinner, if I went out to dinner and I'd allow myself, entree, main course, dessert. I mean, I looked forward to it. I couldn't wait
Then
to
you would
get
punish
there and
yourself after.
but yeah, then I'd come home and I'd be in the freezer, I'd be in the fridge, I'd be in the cupboard, and that would be the trigger. So that was what I was doing to myself. I know, bulimics will go out and do the same sort of thing, but then, and I could never work out how you did this. So, they will go and put their fingers down their throat and throw it all up, thinking that, well, I've enjoyed all of that food, but now I've got to get it out of me because it will put weight on me, But what they don't understand is that during that time that you're stuffing it all in, there is absorption going on. Those kilojoules are being absorbed, and there is a lot more being absorbed in your body than you think. So you can throw it up, but you're really not, getting rid of all of that food and all those kilojoules you thought you were putting into your body. And you're doing all that damage of damaging your teeth and damaging your throat and damaging your whole working system, in that way. So, that's what I was doing for me from day to day. Yeah.
And no one around
9 years.
your family didn't notice there was anything off, or?
My mother, because I lost the weight, it wasn't about the eating, because you're very clever and you do hide it. And I went to boarding school for a couple of years, and my food was dished out for me, and I would control it. I would go, oh no, can I just, and I would control how much I was having. And if they put too much, I just didn't eat it. Well, I could get away with that. I was in a boarding school. No one was watching what I was doing at the table. So it was very easy to get away with eating less. At home, no, nothing was ever said, ever. But my mother did take me to the doctors because, eating disorders, we lose our period as we're getting older. And so she went to inquire about that. And once again, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. They would ask me, what are you eating? And of course, I would fabricate a little bit about what I was doing. And they'd say, well, it sounds like you've got a pretty good diet. What's the problem? And so we would go home, and my mother would take that as gospel and go, oh, well, I'm worrying about nothing. So it just wasn't the awareness and the understanding or the knowledge to be able to pick up on the little things that I was doing, like, all the exercise I was doing all the time. No one, I know I'd been a top athlete. So I guess everyone thought, well, that's just her athleticism. I don't know, because it was never talked about. It was just never talked about. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because also, as having a teenage son, and, the more I know, and the more educated I become, the more things, as parents, we should be aware of and look out for, and, the signs that maybe someone is having a difficult time. So I appreciate you saying that. Besides the misconception of it's all about food, is there anything that you think is thought out there that's incorrect when people think of eating disorders? It's so hard, but I'm just trying to make sure that we're clear that it's not around food, that it's so much more, and it is a lack of loneliness and suffering and so much more than that.
Yeah. Well, it's not about food and weight, it's about control. And that's the bottom line. It's about somewhere in your life, you don't feel in control of your life. You don't feel like you're the boss of your life, or you have no freedom. Somewhere there's a control or a fear element of that sort. And the way that you are responding to that aspect of your life is to develop an eating disorder. So that's my belief. This is a very huge topic, and over the years, as people research it, new ideas come in as to why eating disorders exist in the first place. And some of what I read and some of what I see frustrates me. And others I go, yeah, I'm on board with you. And I think it comes from your own experience and how, you've navigated your way through it, and your belief system about an eating disorder is generated from there. So I need to be very careful and to listen to other points of view and other people's experiences, and accept that for them, that was how they viewed it, and therefore that helped them to recover. But in answering your question, for me, and I make that very clear to listeners today, I'm responding from my experience and my understanding and what I would like to convey as an idea to consider, for recovery. Why do eating disorders happen? My belief, my strong belief is what I've already said. There's something that's happened in your life that remains a stress in your life, an unresolved stress of some sort, and your body is a wonderful machine. It holds onto it for you, protects you from it, and gives you behaviors and ways of dealing and navigating your way through life around it. But then eventually it gets too much. And for me, it was 15 years age, and I went into an eating disorder. And I think we know enough now, thankfully, that if I knew what I know now back then, my first question to me at 15 would be, why are you doing this? What's happening in your life that an eating disorder has turned up?
But of course, most of us at that age, we don't have that self-love, self-awareness. There's the experience.
That's right. But I think now, I mean, when I work with people, it's, okay, what's happening for you? Tell me your story. Tell me the events in your life that highlight unresolved trauma that's in your life. Tell me about your relationships. Tell me about the beliefs and values that you grew up with. I want to hear your story and how you relate and how you feel to the world. And embedded in that story will be the reasons why you're doing an disorder at the moment. And so I know at the moment there's a lot of research and suggestion about genes and connection to genes, and it's all in the genes. And if your family line has eating disorders in it, then there must be a gene factor. I step back from that one a little bit, and I accept that people have that view and they want to work with that view. And if they get success, that's great as a line of thinking. However, my way of looking at that is that, okay, in that line, family line and down the generation, what is the message about life that's being handed down from one generation to the next that sees eating disorder filtered through the generations? What are we teaching our children, and what are we passing on that gives them the opportunity to deviate for a while into an eating disorder? I want to look at the patterns and threads that exist in family.
I really like that. Yeah, because once you can understand it, then you can stop the cycle. You can teach the next generation different, right?
Yeah, I want to look at, the patterns. What's the similar pattern? What are the threads that are going through your family generations that will kickstart this? And, and then you say, well, some do it and some don't. And that's an individual thing, because it depends on, the differences, because everyone in a family can grow up in the same family and you can all have a different outcome.
Absolutely.
How impactful and how often a certain event happened for one person but not for another, the friendships that you bring in, and, if you're going to kick the system. And it depends on who you are in the first place as well, and how you relate and connect. And so for me, I had an added, thing for me to get an eating disorder, and that was sexual abuse as a child up to the age of 5, and on, a couple of different fronts. So I had that trauma in there, and, the blame and the shame and the total responsibility. And that was adults feeding me that belief. So with not having that changed at all, that's embedded. It's in my brain. It's a truth. It's a huge fear. It's living in there, and it's impacting how I view and see the world. So everywhere I go, and one of the ones was, you won't be liked. So that's the idea I take into every schoolyard and every social situation. You will not be liked. You will not be liked. So with that filter, it is little wonder that at the age of 15, it all built up and got too much for me. And that was my body's way of saying, JL, stop. I want you to recover and heal from something. But we didn't know that until I was 37. So,
of course, and I don't think many people do that go through these different things. And I'm so glad that when you talk about recovery, that's where the recovery process starts, is tell me about this, tell me about that. Because it shouldn't really be, and tell me if I'm wrong, it shouldn't really be about food until the end of the recovery process.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, when you're in recovery, there are different areas in it. There's the, you know, the thinking side of it, the cognitive side of it. There's also the food and the exercise and all of those behaviors that we adopt when we're experiencing an eating disorder. And it can be like a mind, well, where the heck do we start here? You
Mm.
know, and for anyone, for me, it would have been too overwhelming to say, okay, we're going to look at your thinking, we're going to look at what you're eating, and we're going to look at your, and we're going to try to combat all of them at the one time. And so for me, I start with the story, because I don't think you can start with food and let's start to increase and do all of this, because fear is going to come in. That fear needs to go. You
Mm.
need to give yourself permission to look at your story and begin to live life a different way. And as those fears leave you, then, and there's a timing, and I guess you gauge it as a practitioner of looking at the person, but you also gauge it by asking them and inquire, do you think you're ready to
Mm.
now, while we're working with your thinking and your behaviors, are you ready to perhaps look at some of your food habits and your food rituals? Are we ready? Which is the easiest one you think you can sort of work with and get rid of now? So you bring that in. And then the exercise, okay, let's bring that in slowly as well, appropriate at the right time for what your body can do. So it's a step-by-step thing, but the very first thing is, let's get rid of these whys, let's get rid of these fears, because the rest isn't going to happen until you do that.
And
So
I
I
could see
think,
that. No, no, and I could see that too, because you had mentioned before how even though the eating disorder had stopped, it had been replaced with other things because we hadn't started at the beginning, the why, right? So that's what we want to avoid, is it turning into something different and it changing form, but still having the same suffering and the same trouble with something else, right? So I'm so glad that it starts there, as it should, right?
as it should. And I, as you were saying that, I remember many years ago here in Adelaide, we have a hospital called Flinders Hospital, and it has an eating disorder unit. And you can go in as an outpatient and you can also be an inpatient. And I went in there for 10 days. And I knew when I went in, it wasn't because I was going to recover. I mean, the eating disorder had actually gone. It was all these other things. And when I went in, it was that intuitive knowing that this is about learning for me. It's not actually about me recovering. So I
Mm.
went in with that, and it was a time for me to observe the other clients or the other patients that were there, to interact with them, engage, have conversations with them.
Mm.
And by this stage, I'd already connected with, I was in my 30s, and I'd already connected with the lady who was helping me with reality therapy. So I had a lot of that knowledge as well. And I remember sitting at a table, a breakfast table, and everybody, all the women that were there had their little pots with all their tablets in them. And
Mm.
I didn't have a pot because I refused to take tablets, and that was a nightmare for them. But anyway, too bad. And, you know, they'd be popping all these pills. And one girl in particular was just chatting, and she said, I said, oh, you know, how long have you been here? And she said, oh, this is my third time that I've come back. And I thought, what the heck are you doing back here for the third time? And she said, when I'm in here, I'm great. I can eat, I can do everything, I'm normal. But
Mm.
as soon as I go home, it all falls apart. And I thought, there's your answer, people. Why aren't you asking this girl
Yes.
happening at home? What's different in that environment? And why aren't you making her an outpatient so she's at home and coming in to see you so she heals in the real world, so she can face her fears and know what they are? Don't cushion her away.
Exactly, because
So
they do that with drug addiction and alcohol. They say, well, what is your environment outside of that?
yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Why would it be any different? Like, yeah.
so that's a real learning for me. And thank goodness I began to have that reality therapy, choice theory knowledge and approach in me as well. So when I came away from that, I went, yeah, that's what that was about for me, to really reinforce that it doesn't matter how many tablets you put into people. It doesn't, unless you ask that girl in particular, okay, what's happening at home? And for me, I wanted to ask her, what relationship at home is the most damaging for you? You know, have you got a mum or a dad that's watching over you? Are you expected to get straight A's? Are you under pressure about this? Were you a top app? You know, who were you before your eating disorder came along? What pressures were you under? All of those questions. And she wouldn't have come back for the third time, you know.
Right.
And that really reinforced in me the importance of looking at, well, in this case, and I guess the biggest learning for me too is the relationships that we have. Relationships can make and break us. And so for me, the relationships, the family relationships with a very controlling, dominating father, sexual abuse, of course, at the hands of, and I won't name them all here because that's just what I do, but, you know, within and without the family. And then having this strong religious, you can't drink, you can't do alcohol, you can't do this, you know. When I was the captain of the netball, a lot of pressure. And when I was the captain in the netball team at Kimber, you know, we won the grand final. So, you know, country towns, they all come out to celebrate, you know, the end of the year, and they all give out their trophies and everything. It's a huge winding, you know, and there's lots of alcohol, lots of people, and everyone having a lot of fun. And as the captain, I was expected to go and collect the trophy on behalf of my team. And initially I wasn't allowed to do it because there was going to be alcohol there. And so my father, no. And in the end, he said, okay, these are the conditions. He drove me there. He wanted to know what time. Oh, about 8 o'clock. So he drove me there just before 8. I was allowed to walk in, go up, collect the trophy, come out and walk straight out and get in the car and go home. He waited for me.
Yeah, you missed out on that beautiful opportunity.
Yeah, so it was all of that control. And so, yeah, that, you know, the relationships that we're in, the events that we have, the traumas that we experience that we haven't resolved, that's what we will find in most of these people that have an addiction of any sort, or mental illness, I should say, of any sort. I want to know your story, people. I want to know your belief system. I want to know what's up here and how you relate to the world and how you see it. Yeah.
When you went to visit that hospital and you were surrounded by people with similar, not stories, but similar, how do you say, similar
behaviors?
Yes, thank you. Did you feel, did you feel less alone because you felt like maybe they understood you a little bit better in that community, in that setting?
I think by the time I got to there, I had a fair bit. I wasn't experiencing an eating disorder anymore. I was put in there because I was exhausted and I was tired. And so I was having a rest more than anything. But I think they were hoping that these people in there would be able to really nail it and get underneath it. But they didn't. So
the reason why I asked is I know sometimes being around, you know, people with similar struggles and sometimes can make us feel like we're a part of something, that we belong to something. And sometimes that can be a barrier to getting recovery as well. I think, to getting help, because you finally feel like you're in this group of people that accept you, that understand you. Do you find that you ever have any clients perhaps that find that that's like a hindrance, like something that will block?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's another strong belief that I have. And I know, once again, groups, you know, let's create a group and we'll all support each other. That's good, that you can feel like you're a part of something. I never did groups. I never did any of those sorts of things. And looking back, I'm really glad. I came away from that. No, you have to heal in the real world. And that means being in the environment that you're in every day and discovering what it is about that environment that's keeping you in this eating disorder. I think groups are good for learning about each other and understanding that, hang on, you are not alone. There are a lot of us that have got similar thinking and similar behaviors, and we can share about that. As long as the next step is, okay, what are we going to do about this, so that we don't remain stuck here? And I think sometimes groups can give us that place of acceptance, and then we become stuck because somewhere in the thinking you go, oh, but if I get better, I won't belong to this group anymore. Then where do I belong? Where am I going to go from here? So you need a person at the helm of that group to make sure that that's the motivation and the encouragement to actually support each other. And then you can still move together as a group and maintain those friendships, but as healthy, well-thriving people, that don't have this codependency of staying stuck, in a world like that. So that's why I felt it was really, really important. The only time I sort of support going into a hospital environment is when obviously you're of a low weight and you are a danger to yourself in that, you could pass away, and you have to go in, you have to be drip fed, you have to be force fed, and all of those to keep your body going. Having said that, I've seen too many that go in there and do that, and they stay in there for long periods of time. And I think, why are you still here? The right questions are not being asked of you. Clearly, otherwise you wouldn't be back here again. You wouldn't. And just recently, because what I've done this year is I wrote all my programs that are, available through my website, and they are very different. And I notice that people will engage with them and then they sort of back off from them. And I think my programs are a very different approach, because it's what we've been talking about here that is embedded, as well as my story is embedded in it. And it does ask the people to actually do the work. And I think it's a very different approach that perhaps people are not expecting. So what I decided to do was, okay, I'm going to create a 10-week Zoom webinar for a group of, and I don't know what the right number would be, maybe 5, maybe 10 people. And that would be a group situation. And I've got, it all set up. And this is the program I'm doing with a client in New York at the moment, and she's just loving it. Also giving people a place to belong, on a webinar, but you're sitting on your own. But with me at the helm, it's okay. No, I don't want you staying stuck here. I want you all to be able to meet one day at a healthy weight and doing healthy things and telling me what your career looks like and who your husband is and who your children are and all of those sorts of things that we deserve to have in life. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the point that I was going to make about all of that. It's just flown out of my head. Maybe that wasn't the direction I was meant to go in. But
I love what you said. I love it, because you can be too safe in a group. Like, I think like what you said exactly, when I joined an anxiety group, and I felt at that point in my healing process, at that very moment, what I needed was to feel that I wasn't the only one. So the group worked. When I started to move through that and not feel as lonely and not feel as depressed and all the things, and learning about it's, the things that I'm thinking about are not as important as I'm really making them out to be, and I'm blowing them up and all these things, then it's time to kind of break off from the group, which can be sometimes difficult if you rely on it too much, and then go from there. But I think it's absolutely, like what you said is absolutely spot on, from even other disorders, because I think if you don't do that and you don't live in the, in your normal life, you'll never be able to really get there. You'll never really, you always have a step back. I think it's so important, because you need to be put in those stressful situations, and know what to do instead of going back. So I think that that's great, the way that you approach it.
Yeah. So that you can learn tools and skills that, okay, this is a trigger for me, and this is what I'm doing. I'm starting to take my thinking down that negative road. Okay, let's cut it right here, right now. Instead of that negative thought, let's think of a positive one. Okay, let's whack that one in right here, right now. And even if you're panicking, instead of saying, go, I'm liked and loved for who I am. Put that new thought in and just keep thinking it until you've calmed yourself down. So what you're doing is retraining the brain. At the moment, your brain has got a certain, a lot of ideas about how life works. And it's not how life works. So we have to get in there and get those thoughts out and put the new ones in that support you. But coming back to that group thing, go to the group. It will have a purpose for you. But also be very aware that one day you want to be able to move on to the next group that is right for you. And I don't mean perhaps another group where you all meet on a Wednesday night and there's 20 of you. It might be 2 or 3 friends, and then the next situation. So you're almost outgrowing, that served its purpose and got you through to there. You've outgrown that, and be aware that one day you're going to outgrow that and get to the next. And that's a triumph for you, because
Yes,
you're getting
that's the
back to living
goal.
your world, and you're not letting these other people down. They're on their journey. You don't actually have to take them with you, because you don't know what you've given them, to
Yes,
enable.
thank you. You don't have to take that, just puts so much pressure. You cannot heal everyone in the group. You need to take care of yourself. It's okay to just think of you,
Yeah,
during that time. We don't need to help everyone and be there for everyone when we're trying to deal with our own things. And it's okay. It doesn't mean we don't care about other people's struggles. It doesn't mean that we're not empathetic, but we do have to take care of ourselves. Absolutely.
yeah, and have that next vision, if you like, set up, ready to go, and then trust in that inner voice, or whatever you want to call it, and listen to it when it says you're ready to move on. You're ready for the next step, and go to the next one and go to the next one, because that's your ultimate goal. And in doing so, as I said before, you don't know, someone in that group might say, hey, but we don't want you to, but by you going, and then they might see you one day and say, how are you going? And that might be the motivation they need to do that next step. And you might be pulling them with you unknowingly, so don't ever underestimate the power that you leave behind by leaving a group as well. So
Yes.
yeah, I think we could talk about this for a long time.
I know. Just going back to the courses that you offer on your website. So you're taking a new approach, you said, with this Zoom room, just to see, right? And is this, so do you find just different stages require different training too, right? Different stages of recovery, maybe, need a different approach, like you were saying. So someone can join the Zoom calls, and then when they're ready to break free, you'll help them move on into the next stage, and that might look like something different for them and be more
Well,
one-on-one. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, I came up with this idea. I did a business course back in January, just to learn more about business and how to handle myself and all of those sorts of things. And it came as a result of that 7-week course. And I thought, how about if I set up a webinar thing, a 10-week Zoom thing, where a group of us meet whenever for an hour and a half. And so I set it all up. It's all there. And I've got all the notes, and we're going to do this in week 1, and this in week 2, and this in week 3. But the main idea behind that was to get people to really understand what is really happening for them. It's not a program that focuses on diet culture. It's not going to focus on counting calories. It's not going to focus on weighing ourselves. Obviously, those things will creep into the conversation. But the focus of it is the same as the other programs. It's assisting a person to look at their story and look at their why, and not only identify it, but know what to do with it to turn it around into a positive, so that they can come through. And the idea of a group thing is that, so it does provide opportunity for people to engage in those conversations and not feel alone, but also perhaps hear something and go, oh, you tried that. Well, that sounds like a good idea. Or, so you can have those meaningful conversations. But I would want to see growth in each of those clients, in that 10 weeks. I'd want to assess and make sure that they're not hanging on and they're not using it as an excuse to stay there,
Right.
So there is homework because of the ex-teacher in me. I
Got
have
to
all
do
these
the work
terminologies.
though.
Each week they have things that they need to do, and then come back and share, how that went for them and all of that sort of stuff. And I set that up, but it hasn't come to fruition. It's really frustrating. So this wonderful girl in New York who follows me on Instagram, I thought, you know what, I'm going to offer this program to her at a minimal cost, because I think if you pay for it, you take it more seriously than if you don't pay for it. And she was so excited. She got my book and read it, and she's, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm going to meet you. I'm just an ordinary person, people. And so yeah, I engaged with her. I set up a Zoom and we said hi, and she's sitting out of her apartment in her car talking to me. And every Saturday morning, Friday night for her, she's a mother of 2 children and has a hubby and everything. So that's the time that sort of works for her. And I go through this webinar with her. I do the slides with her. And then because it's one-on-one, we can open it up and make it more individualized, just for her as well. So really enjoying the process with her. And she, might write an email. I've got an email I've got to answer back today about something she wants to know. So, and she knows she's free to do that. She can email me, JL, this, or we go onto Instagram.
That's
messages.
great. Yes, I love
that. And so she knows she's got support, all those miles away, but she doesn't have to wait a week if she's panicking. She can speak to me, during the week as well. So it seems to be working for her. And then at the end of this process, which is going to be longer than 10 weeks, I just know we're going to be here for a long time, and that's absolutely fine. The part of the deal was that she would then give me feedback, what worked in your program, what didn't I enjoy, what can I think you can leave out, I would like this expanded on, and so that I can tweak it, as I go along. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm up to at the moment.
And as you're talking about this lady, I can see the joy in your face, and I can hear it in your voice, because you're helping her, and that's what it comes down to. And I'm so happy that you're able to do that through your experience and turn it into something beautiful. What is the title of your book? Maybe let us know that, and where we can find you. And if we want to connect with you, I think you would really help. If anybody out there needs someone to talk to, someone who understands, someone who knows and will ask the questions that most people don't take the time to ask.
Exactly. My website, JL Keez, and Keez, I'm sure you'll have it in the notes anyway, but Keez, some people get that wrong, jlkeez.com.au. Everything's there on my website, outlined it. The webinar's not on there because my website designer went and had a baby. How rude, but anyway. And so extra things I want to have added on there in my media kit. I've got a few articles and things. We'll just wait until that little girl's a bit older and I'll get back to Sally on that one. But my book is advertised there as well. And and all the courses. But do expect people, if you choose to select the free program, don't be put off by, all the wordage and all the text and everything. Be bothered to read it and be bothered to learn about who you are. And because that's what I try to do in creating these things. Please take the time to look at your story.
There's a method. We don't end up like this overnight, so we can't fix it overnight. You have to put in the work. You have to know that you are important enough and to love yourself enough to make the time. Nothing is more important when you're in that situation than taking this time and walking through it with somebody. This is going to help for the rest of your life, right?
And the other thing I want to add while you're saying that, because I always start at any of the written programs that I've done in the webinar as well, is support, as well as having me in a webinar or, another therapist. Make sure that you set up a good support system around you. And by that, I mean, it only needs to be one or two people, but take those people on your journey with you, educate them as well, and be picky in who you select. Make sure that they are people who want to grow and understand you, who take the time to listen to you. And even though they might not understand, or inwardly they might even be going, seriously, really, but they don't show that. They are willing to support you to become you. Probably the worst person to choose as a support is one of those people in a relationship that's contentious already and already controlling. And that might sadly be mum or dad. They might be the worst person because they might say, I want you to heal, but I want you to heal in this way. There might be an underlying, but I still want you to do things like this. I don't actually want you to be you, so be really picky with that support system as well. Really, really important to have people to turn to yell and scream at if that's what you're feeling like doing, and they're prepared to listen and support you in that way. So I just think it was important to point that out. Yeah.
No, absolutely, for sure. Because sometimes if you pick people that are too close in your circle, who grew up the way that you did, who have the same beliefs as you do, all of those things, you're not going to move forward. You might even go backwards. So I think that that's really important that you mentioned that. Thank you. You're so brilliant.
Yeah. Just sharing my knowledge and my wisdom, I suppose, over many years, and knowledge and wisdom that I wish was given to me at the age of 15. And I wouldn't have been wandering around there for so long, just suffering.
Now you can be that for somebody else. You can't go back, right? So now you can be that light and ask all the questions that people didn't think to ask. So, and that's why we talk about these things. And I'm so happy that we talked about this topic today because, like I said, I don't know a lot around this topic because I haven't had the experience. But if there is anybody who's listening to the show, reach out. If you're having these issues, reach out to somebody. You cannot do this on your own. Just like if you're having a problem with alcohol or drugs or anything, reach out. And like we said at the beginning, if you know someone and you see the signs, we talked today in this episode about seeing some of the signs and what to recognize. Even if you're not sure, reach out to that person, make them feel like they're not alone. Even if they don't want to speak to let them share this podcast episode. Perhaps something will, just, it'll click with them and then they'll decide, I do deserve better. Let me start with this. So thank you so much. Was there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't talk about?
Things that come to mind as you were speaking, that last bit then. If you do notice something in somebody, like Inga did with me all those years ago, her approach really worked for me. She must have, I think, talked to the doctor and they must have colluded together to work out their approach, which was nurturing for me. It wasn't confronting. Okay. So it's really important that if you're noticing something in somebody and you really want to support them and get them help or whatever, please don't go up and say, look, I can see what you're doing. You're not eating properly. I want you to do, it's got to be in a nurturing and caring way. Otherwise, that will be the end of that relationship for a start. They won't want to know you more. But really, perhaps seek advice from somebody. How will I approach this situation? How can I do this for this person? And because the best way to go up to someone is say, look, and we'll just use the name Sally just because Sally, sorry, it come into my mind, my website designer. She hasn't got an eating disorder, don't we? But, Sally, I'd love to have a cup of tea with you. Look, I've really noticed some changes in you and I value you as a person and I really value our friendship. Is there anything you'd like to share with me? Or am I on the wrong track? Because I've noticed changes in this and changes in that and is there anything that you'd like to share with me? No. Okay, well, I'm here when you're ready. Don't fall and just back off. So, okay, so let's have that cup of tea. What are you doing for the rest of the day? Completely go off in a different tangent.
Come from a place of love.
You've sown that seed. And then leave it for a month or so and say, look, remember when we talked about that? Are you sure? Because I'd love to support you if there's anything there. And it would be confidential. I would support you on that and blah, blah, blah. So it's very caring and very non-confronting. And then you're creating trust in that way in that person. Even though you might still be friends, there's that next level is a level of trust that's different. So go into that space quietly and do it that way rather than confronting that person. And only one person, not two or three people, otherwise they'll feel
and even if in the end, even if you decide not to open up to that person, I bet you that you're still going away thinking about the conversation, even if it was just them asking, maybe it'll open up. I don't want to open up to this person, but I am thinking about it more. And maybe I do need to speak to somebody and I'll find somebody else. It'll at least start the process, I think.
Process. And if you do, like I'm thinking of me here, I have a business card. So, and I did do this with someone and that girl's actually struggling with finishing year 12. So she's sort of, that's her focus at the moment. But I did give my business card and my pamphlet to this intervening person. It's a teacher. And that was handed on to this person. Okay. Look, I've just come across this person and she looks really great. I'm just going to give it to you for consideration. Walk away. And then, they've got that information. So as long there's no pressure, it's just a suggestion that might not work for another 6 months, but hey, the seed's been sown. So it's really, really important to do that very gently and carefully, at their time.
Yeah, we have to
And
make them feel safe. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We all got to find, our own safe space, right?
That's right. It's always got to be around trust and safety. Because so often with eating disorders, the background is not feeling safe. And that was one of mine with being sexually abused, is not feeling safe. So yeah, lots of areas that come into it. If a listener from today would like to connect with me as well, my business email, hello@jlkeez.com.au. If you've got any inquiries or questions or want to know more about the webinar, feel free to connect with me in that way as well. I'd love to hear from you. So that's it. They were the other two things I wanted to say. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm glad that we gave this this episode the time it deserves, because I think I'm hoping that people will reach out, and even if it's not with you or with me, that they'll at least realize that they can't do it on their own. That is the very first step. So thank you so much for coming and speaking about this very important topic.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And sitting here in this little bedroom looking out at a rainy day. But anyway, if people could see how we've set ourselves up to do recording, they'd laugh, wouldn't they?
But honestly, it's been so educational and I learned a lot. So if I did, I'm sure someone else did too. And there's always the two sides. We always try to approach the person who is suffering, but also the person who isn't and can observe other people, because we all need that, we all need that person in our corner. And maybe we could be that person for somebody else. We don't have to be dealing with certain things to be compassionate. To reach out, to be a friend, to help end this feeling that I'm alone. So
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think we've put a lot into it. Thank you. With your guidance and your questioning, a lot of material that I think will be helpful. Yeah, that's blowing my bags a bit, isn't it? But I hope it will be. I guess I've spoken the things that I wish I heard at 15.
And that's what's important, because and you're going to be that person that you wish was there for you, for so many people. And there's nothing more beautiful than that, honestly. I'm so glad that you're in a great place, and that, you had that one person in your corner who convoluted with the doctor, who, did it all about love, who came from a place of giving rather than we're doing an intervention, Of course you're like all these TV shows portray all these, all these things, right? Oh, anyway.
That doesn't work.
No. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you today, and please keep in touch.
I will, always.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe or leave a review. See you next week on the Giving Starts With You podcast.